Excellent. So good evening, everyone. My name is Corina. I'm a product person and an organizer of Women Tech Makers Berlin. At Women Tech Makers Berlin, we are doing our bit to encourage diversity on the tech scene in the city. We run a variety of events like this one, where people give talks. We also have fireside chats, different workshops, and coding study jams. Of course, this year, our coding study jams were put on hold given the pandemic that we're living through. Nevertheless, we're super happy to have you here this evening. We ask you to kindly follow our code of conduct also online, which in a nutshell means be respectful to each other and be nice. I am super happy to have Mar with us this evening. She is the director of product design at simplabs, a digital product consultancy with an emphasis on sustainable success. She helps companies solve their users' problems in creative and scalable ways. Mar is passionate about building design systems, cross-functional collaboration, and artistic technology. And this evening, she will be talking to you about version control in design, best practices for collaboration. I'm gonna a few house rules. She's gonna take us through the talk. Everybody will stay muted for the duration, and then you will have a chance to ask questions. You can choose to unmute yourself and do so, or if you're more comfortable, you can write on chat, and I will read the question out loud for everybody. So, without further ado, Mar, on to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. So let me share my screen here. There we go. Okay, so yes, as Karina already said, I will be talking today about version control in design and best practices for collaboration. My name is Marhai. Thank you for the intro. Okay, so let's take a look first at what is the job of a designer. So a lot of people would think of designer and this is what they think. They think we draw shapes and we pick typefaces and we pick colors and create layouts and user flows and we design components. And this is true. This is a part of our job for sure. But this is actually only the visible final output. So there's a lot that happens behind the scenes in the design process. And there's also a lot of minds that need to come together to collaborate if we want to build a successful product. I really like this quote from Abstract. The majority of a design job is orchestrating the team, ensuring visual consistency, updating stakeholders, documenting decisions, interpreting feedback, and delivering the work for implementation. So it is clear that we actually need to establish processes and have tools that help us collaborate and communicate as effectively as possible with our team, as well as other teams within our company. Process and tools that help us generate detailed documentation that explains our decision. So knowledge can be a strength in our organization and can stay there even after we have left. And this is actually what this talk is about. So version control. What is version control? The focus of version control is actually to allow many people to successfully collaborate in complex projects. A version control system, the acronym being VCS, is a system that allows us to track changes in files over time. Git is probably something we've all heard of or used. It's the most popular version control system of all time. And something interesting to keep in mind as we go through this talk is that version control in design is always behind code. So due to the complexity of the type of information that is being tracked, feature parity between version control in design and version control in code still has not been reached. So yeah, this is also something to keep in mind is that it allows us to keep track of these changes across different users and also in different computers. There are a few features that make a version control system useful. Let's go through them one by one. First of all, backing up and restoring. So we can jump back to any moment in time in our files. Synchronization, we can share our files and we can stay up to date with the latest version. Short-term undo, we can play around with our ideas, and then if we decide it doesn't work out at all, we can just go back to the last good version. Then we also have a long-term undo. So if we want to check on a change that was done a year ago, we can jump back in time and check. We can also track changes. So as files are being updated, we can leave a message explaining what and why the change was made. We can also track ownership. So we can tag the changes with the name of the person who made it. And this is of course very useful for blaming, but even more important for giving credit where it's due. We can also sandbox. So we can have an isolated area where we make our own temporary changes, and then we can work out the kinks before joining that to the common files. And last, but most importantly, perhaps, is branching and merging. So this is what we could consider kind of the golden children of version control system, because they allow us to have a process in which we can make our changes in isolation, then share our changes with another person, have them review, have a conversation about these changes, and then decide if we want to proceed with these changes before we add them back into the common project. So let's take a look at a very simple scenario of how version control works. So first of all, we're going to go over some lingo as well here. Repository or repo. This is a container in which a project's files exist when we want to track them by version control. Then we have the master, which is over here. And that is also called the main line or the main trunk. And it is an agreed upon source of truth version of all files. And it is typically used as the base for new work. We can take that work from the master and then branch. The branch is a personal workspace. So it's actually a copy of the repo that we then have in our computer. And we are able to modify it in our isolated area. So we're tracking our changes separately. And this way we can test out ideas, knowing that the changes will not affect anyone else. The working copy here is a local copy of the files, and this is where we make the changes. When we make a change, we have two options. If we don't think the change works, if we don't like it, we can revert. So that's basically throwing away the local changes, going back to the previous version. Or if we do like the changes, then we can go ahead and commit. So that is like a super save. We're saving the latest changes. We're saving a snapshot of our repository. And when we commit, we have the opportunity to add a commit message. And this is basically a short message that describes our changes. So it typically consists of a title and a description. Over time, we're going to be accumulating these commit messages, and we will have a list of them. And this is called a change log or change history. And it's basically a list of commit messages since the file was created, which we can see an example of here. Once we've committed all our work and we are happy with it, then we can go ahead and ask for a review. So a review is when you share your changes with another person to have a conversation about it before it is integrated back into master. So a version control system typically only takes diffs, which is the changes that were made while editing, like the differences between the files. And this is what the version control system typically stores and then shares in the review rather than the full copy of the files. This is, of course, both to keep file size small, but also to make it easier when we review. We're actually only looking at the differences between the files rather than every single file completely as a whole. And finally, we get a successful review. Our colleagues are happy with our work. We can go ahead and merge back, which means we apply the diff changes from our branch to master. So it integrates our work with the work that is already in master. What happens if multiple people are working on the same file at the same time? What can happen is a merge conflict. So a merge conflict is when we have edits that overlap or contradict with each other. And so the version control system needs our help to solve the problem. It can't figure it out on its own. So when we have code merge conflicts in a code version control system, I would say that it's relatively painless process to merge two files. Of course, not always, but I would say generally, the version control system helps you. It offers you ways to merge the files. In design, that is not really there yet. So the version control system does not offer you a way to merge files. It is an all or nothing process. So you either have to take their changes or overwrite them with yours. And there are techniques for dealing with this, and we're going to be taking a look at them a little bit later on. Okay, so version control now specifically for design. Today we're going to be looking at abstract for Sketch, and abstract is also now for Adobe XD, is in beta. And we're also going to be looking at version history for Figma. And we're looking at those only because they are the biggest players in UI design. First of all, kind of like making it as clear as possible early on, version history is not version control. So version history offers no way to manage conflicts or merge changes to a file. So abstract is an external software for version control. As I said, it supports Sketch and Adobe XD. And version history is a feature which is a part of Figma. There are other tools for version control. As far as I can tell, none of them offer support for Figma. But there's Cactus, Plant, Pix, Folio Tower, and these all support sketch files as well as some other design files. Okay, so starting with abstract. Abstract is called, quote unquote, the GitHub for design. So it is a design workflow management system. Its focus is on providing historical context without information loss. It was originally targeted at Sketch users, and now it's slowly expanding to Adobe XD. As a result of its original target, it is Mac only. It was launched in 2017, and its estimated valuation is $190 million. Abstract is based on Git, so it has most of the similar basic functionality that a version control system has for code. And it also has a very opinionated workflow, which means that pretty much there's only one way of doing things. And let's take a look at that. So this is what it looks like when you open it up. In this case, I already have created a bunch of projects. This is from work. But of course, if it's the first time you open it, you will have a blank slate, so you can create a new project. You do that in this upper right-hand corner. In this case, we would just go ahead and select one of my existing projects, the website of my company. And next step would be to create a new branch up here. Okay. Next, we have to name the branch. And now I can open my files that I've already added, and I have to open them directly in Abstract. I can't open them in Sketch. So Abstract basically is my portal to get to my Sketch files. So I double click on that and I get my Sketch file, wonderful. Now you will see once Abstract is installed, this plugin at the bottom of the window. And if it's in the way there, you can tap the logo and the plugin will go to the top of the window. So in this case, I want to remove this blue hero section. I want to remove this image and replace it with one that we have from a team video that we've created recently. And I also want to change this text, make it a bit more simple. Okay, voila, changes are done. Now I save my file and now I'm able to click on this button, commit changes. This opens up a modal and the modal gives me the opportunity to write a title and it gives me the opportunity to write a description here. So something pretty cool is that Abstract will actually save this message if you hit cancel, which means that if you have a task that has a lot of small micro tasks within it, you don't have to take a handwritten note or keep a mental note of what it is that you're doing. Rather, every time that you do something, you go to the commit modal, you write down what you did, and then you can cancel out of it as many times as you need until you accumulate, for example, if you're doing a cleanup chore, until you accumulate a certain amount of things that you've cleaned up and that you think is now like a good amount, a good sized package to actually make a commit out of it. Okay, once we've committed, we can see our project overview. And here on the left-hand side, middle left panel, we can see our commits. And in this case, we have only one. But over time, we will, of course, be building this up until we are done with our task. This is a short task, so we are now done with our task. And we can now change the status of our branch. So there's a couple ways we can do this. We can use this integrated feature, the branch status feature, and change our status here. We can also rename our branch at any point. So if we wanted to add more additional information about where we're at in our status, we can do that as well. And in this case, I'm going to request a review. So I would click this button here. And then I would add a reviewer, in this case, Marco, my boss. And there we go. So Marco has, that was fast, but reviewer has been added. We wait a few minutes or, a few hours and for them to have time to take a look at it. Once they approve, we will have a notification up here on the upper right-hand corner. If we open this notification panel, I can see that Marco has approved my changes. And I can also see that automatically the status of my branch has been also updated. So we can close that notification panel and we can now select merge branch. We can add any comments that we need and voila. So now our branch has been merged. And here we can see the history of all the different branches that have ever been merged into this project. And if we click on each one of these branches, we can see all of the commit messages here. And of course, clicking on each commit message allows you to see more details, as well as all the diffs. So all the files that were manipulated during that commit. Okay, when do we merge? So there are actually two different approaches to when merging should happen. And really it's up to you and your team which approach you decide to choose. So there are some teams that believe that master should be what is approved design. So once the design team has approved something, then we merge it back to master. This means that master is always going to be ahead of the live product. Of course, this would be complicated for handover if master is not is always moving, always evolving, always a moving target. But Figma does have a feature called collection, which is basically a folder where you can put designs that you want to present. And in this feature, you're able to toggle auto update on or off. So you can toggle it off, freeze your design, and then hand it over at that point. There are other teams that prefer to consider master as what is in production. So they only merge back once the changes have already been implemented. And as a result, master is a direct reflection of what the user sees. The downside I see with this approach is that as designs change over time, it will be harder and harder to merge changes because it becomes more and more complex. So if you ask me for my recommendation, I would definitely suggest that you go with the first option here. Sometimes we have merge conflicts. So when multiple people are working on the same file, this is something that may happen. And in this case, the conflict is quite obvious. So the headline here is red, whereas the headline here is blue. There's also a feature where you can put the artboard one on top of each other and see the difference. To help you find those differences. But I have to admit, there are sometimes, many times, when the conflicts are pretty much invisible or very difficult to spot. So if you made a group of elements, for example, that is something that is going to be hard to spot. If you added different pins for resizing, that is going to be something that is very difficult to spot. You can also have micro updates to styles and variables. Unfortunately, just touching an artboard for abstract, that is considered a change. So if you're just snooping around, want to copy an element, want to double check which style was used in a specific type of text, that is considered a change, and that will be committed. And if you pull if you update your artboards from master, and somebody else has actually made a change there, sometimes it's hard to know what is what. So there are some different techniques that so wait, I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. So when we resolve merge conflicts, yeah, there's only two options. We can either overwrite our work in the current branch with master, or we can select our branch and overwrite master. So yes, unfortunately, this is an all or nothing process. You can't pick elements from different artboards. So what you can do when you're merging conflicting artboards is a bit of a manual process. So you would take a note of which of the artboards are conflicting, and then you cancel out of your update branch flow. And then within your branch, you can duplicate the artboards that had conflicts. And now you can go back, get the updates from master, select master as the artboards that you want to keep, and that will overwrite your work in those artboards. But you have your duplicate, so you now see side by side what was in master and what was in your file. And then you can manually merge your artboard with the artboard in master. Now, how to try to avoid these merge conflicts to begin with? There are a few different collaboration techniques. So one of the limits in abstract is that only the branch owner can work on their branch. So let's go through 3 different scenarios. The first scenario is when you are working with a non-designer. So say you are working with a copywriter. The first thing you would do is you would stop working your branch. Then the non-designer would make a child branch and they do their work. Say they're going to update all the text in a flow you just designed. Once they're done, they add you as a reviewer. You can go ahead, review their work, and then merge their child branch back into your parent branch. That should result in no conflicts. Now, second scenario, what happens when multiple designers work on the same task? So first, what you can do is you can divide work, and ideally each designer will have their own artboards. Then you create a parent branch for that feature, for that task, and each designer makes their own child branch. And now each person will work on their own artboards, and then they can merge back to parent. Now, the third scenario and the most complex scenario would be when multiple designers are working on the same artboard. So let's say I'm working on an artboard in the parent branch, and then I know somebody else is going to want to work on the same artboard in the child branch. Okay, so first we have our branches, we create them. In the child branch, we duplicate that artboard that we know is going to be worked on by multiple people. And the person in the child branch works on the duplicate. When the updates are made in the parent branch, we update our branch from parent. And now again, we have our artboards side by side. We bring our changes from the other artboard manually to the one that we've just gotten from parent. Then we duplicate then we remove the duplicates, and then we merge that back to parent. So yes, it's a time-consuming process. Yes, it's very manual. Yes, we wish we were at a better stage in terms of version control and conflict resolution, but this is where we're at with abstract. Of course, something important is to be considerate. So anytime that you are merging your work into somebody else's branch, make sure you always have a conversation with your colleague before you overwrite their work. Okay, so this was abstract. Now let's take a look at Figma. Figma is called, quote unquote, the Google Docs for design. So its focus is on collaboration and on working on the same document at the same time. It is a web-based tool. It runs in all operating systems. It launched in 2016. and it is valued at more than $2 billion. Okay, so Figma has this feature called version history, which is a timeline of events dating back to the file's creation. And as I said earlier, version history is not version control because there is no way to manage conflicts or merge changes to a file, among others. We'll see the exact feature breakdown after this. Okay, so the way version control works is that after every 30 minutes of inactivity, it automatically saves a snapshot. And the snapshot includes the name of a person who made the changes, but it does not force a message describing the changes. So with this list of auto-saved snapshots, it can be hard to stay oriented. And Figma does not provide any tools to highlight the differences between the different snapshots. Here comes manual versioning. So this is something you can do to help the process. You can deliberately save a version and name it. Also, you can go back in time and rename auto-saved versions. So if you haven't done it so far, you can still somewhat organize your history. Sorry, I got excited. Yeah, you can still organize your history. So it's not all lost if you haven't been doing this so far. And with version history, you can go back in time to see, restore, or make duplicate versions of your files. And then you can, pretty cool, you can share this version. So each version in version history has a unique URL. And this is helpful for handover because you're essentially freezing your design in that point in time. So how does this work? Here we are in our Figma file. We're going to first open the menu that is next to the file name. And here we select show version history. And the version history will be displayed in the right panel. This is a pretty new document. So you can see there's no auto saves when I took the screenshot, but there were 2 manual saves, which is why they have this title written out. If I want to make a manual save of a version, I would select the plus sign. And it gives me a modal where I will now add my title and description. And over time, this is what the version history should look like. So we would have a mix of auto-save versions and manually saved versions. And then we can see, of course, the different people collaborating on the file. Okay, so that is how version history works on Figma. If we compare Figma and Abstract feature by feature, from the list that I went through at the beginning of the presentation, we can see that they both have an ability to back up and restore. They both offer synchronization, short-term undo, and long-term undo. There is a way on both of them to track changes. On Abstract, you are somewhat being forced to leave a message every time that you save your changes. In version history, it's not a forced process, but there is manual versioning. In both, you can track ownership. In Abstract, you can sandbox, and this is done with your branch. So whatever you do in your branch, nobody else needs to be affected by until you decide to merge those changes back to master. In version history, there's no sandboxing really, but you can always duplicate the work or duplicate the file, play around with it, and then bring your changes once you're happy with them. In Abstract, we have branching and merging with a review process. In version history, we don't have branching and we don't have merging. So all our changes are going to go live, basically. That's the whole point of Figma. Yeah, just to kind of also clarify this is not a competition. This is not about the old Sketch versus Figma debate, which is better. I mean, both programs have their strengths, both programs have their weaknesses. So unfortunately, it is very unlikely that Abstract and Figma will ever work together. I would say that they probably consider themselves as pretty big rivals, but both platforms will continue evolving on their own. And hopefully over time, they will bring more and more advanced features of version control to both platforms. As I said, this is not about which is best. So even though both of them have their strengths and their weaknesses, even if we have a personal preference, we don't always get to choose with which program we work. So oftentimes we join a team or a company that uses a specific program, and we just have to go ahead and use that. So the point of this talk is actually on how to invest in practices that bring us success in the long run, no matter which program we use, and on how to get the best of each. So when we have good collaboration practices, we will likely have a happy team. When we have a happy team, we will have a better built product. And when we have a better built product, hopefully we will have happy users. So let's take a look at these best practices. Okay. Best practices for collaborating in design. It's all about communication and conventions. So I encourage you to explore different approaches and also integrate new ideas little by little until you find what works best for you and your team. It's also about thinking systemically. So it's always the same struggle, no matter which team, no matter which company. Designers are always having a hard time because they're solving the same problems over and over, and they don't feel like their designs are implemented properly. Developers are always having a hard time with custom styling of every component. And when you style every component in a custom way, that is going to contribute to a messy code base, which is going to be a pain to work with. So focus on establishing practices that help avoid frustration in your team. Some of these are component-based design, using variables for everything, including fonts, colors, and spacing, and over time evolving your design system. So having guidelines, documentation, and sharing your knowledge. Also, very, very important is to learn to articulate the what and the why. So learn how to express what to look for, and more importantly, why it was done. And that is not just for others, right? So it's also to help your future self once you've forgotten about the details of the task. Even though a picture is worth 1,000 words, it can be very hard to tell the difference between two versions. And even more, it's often impossible to just guess the reason why, what the reason is behind a change. So learn to express it, learn to articulate it, and make the habit of writing it down. Okay, another thing that's important is status. It matters. So communicate with your team, let them know what your status is. Is something in progress? Is something an exploration? Is something ready for review? Is something final? In Abstract, you can use the branch status feature, and you can also rename your branch to convey this information. In Figma, you can rename the frame or put this like an emoji before the name of the frame. And you can also use a plugin, such as this one, to convey what status your frame is in. Okay, so even if we use a system that forces us to add commit messages every single time that we save our work, we actually won't be saved from our own laziness. So this is something that actually was seen in the wild. Somebody from my company put a screen grab of this recently. Yeah, it's not going to be helpful. It's not going to be helpful to go back in time. It's not going to be helpful to collaborate with your teammates. If all that they see is design many features, work in progress, fixes, what does that mean? It's important to learn to articulate your thoughts. Be reflected when writing your commit or version history messages. So in the title, you will write your summary. Abstract has a bit of a longer title, Figma is shorter. And then you can add a bit of a detailed explanation in the description. You should use imperatives. So something like add icons is better than something like added icons or adds icons. Also try to use proper grammar, capitalization, and punctuation. If you use an issue tracker, add the ticket number. Also include all contextual documentation. So if you have links that are relevant, such as design system documentation, user testing, or A/B test outcomes, or previous design explorations, include them there. And also try to commit or add to version history several times a day. So every time that you finish a part of a feature or arrive to a decision, commit your changes, make it a habit. We can also be more expressive with our commit messages. So engineers often use something that is called semantic git, which is a keyword that prefixes the commit message, and that helps us communicate what type of work is being done. So this has been adapted for a design context, but these are some examples of words that you could use. You could use feat for feature, update. You could use explore, copy for changes in text, fix, docs, style polish, or chart cleanup. And of course, you can include emojis to add a little bit of a visual representation and to make your files more pretty. And of course, you can also use these for branch names and yeah, both your commits and your version history titles as well. Okay, so the last important thing and best practice is to always have somebody review your changes. So have a conversation about your work before you make it global or include it back into the work that everybody's using. In abstract, you have a formal workflow that you can use. So you can use this like pull request based workflow. In this case, your reviewer checks your work before it is merged. In Figma, what you can do is you can update your frame status. So maybe you are in progress at first, and then you are ready for review. You can tag your reviewer in a comment. And once they're happy with your work and you both agree you want to go forward with it, then you can update the frame status again with final. Here are my recommendations for golden rules of design feedback. Okay, so every time that you give feedback, when somebody's asked you for some in a review, for example, always connect it to the design goals. So this is not about taste, it's about whether the work is meeting its objective. Always keep it constructive rather than critical. So be reflected and do that before you speak. How is saying what you're saying going to help improve the work? Point out its strengths. This ensures that they don't get removed later on. And if something looks odd or weird, rather than assuming that it is wrong, just ask. So it could be that that thing is that way because the designer has some information or a reason that you just don't know about, or vice versa. Maybe you have some information that the designer doesn't know about. So ask instead of assume. Okay, now let's take a quick look at the future. So when thinking about the future of version control, we can take a look at these companies and potentially get a glance of where we're going as a whole in product design tools, in the future of product design tools. And we can, of course, hope that we can only get more sophisticated features of version control in the future. So one of them to keep an eye on is Almanac. So Almanac is a real-time document editing tool that is cloud-based and it has version control. And I found this because I was taking a look at Abstract on TechCrunch, and I found that they had invested in this company. It's also open source. So from my understanding, this is basically Abstract and Figma combined. And if this is already possible with text documents, potentially it means that it will be possible in the future with cloud-based collaboration design tools as well, hopefully. Another three tools that are, or three companies that are getting a bit of hype is Modules, Alba, and Supernova. So these companies fit the quote unquote like visual coding category. At least two of them do. The third one promises that it can sync design and code of all components across all tools and all platforms. So if the future is that design is going to be visual coding, Potentially, this also means that we're going to have very sophisticated version control system in all of our programs in the future. And that's my hope. Okay, conclusion. So first of all, if you're still here and you are still paying attention, thank you so much for hanging in there. Okay, first point, you don't need to know how to code to benefit from version control. So even if these practices do come from engineering, they are beneficial to everyone that handles complex amounts of digital information. Getting familiar with these concepts helps us speak the same language. So when we bridge the gap between design and development, we can collaborate and work better together. And more importantly, we can build a better product, which benefits our users. And that's the most important part. And finally, it takes a village. Version control brings in transparency and creates accountability in design. It helps us make changes visible that would otherwise go unnoticed, like big cleanups. And it also gives credit to all team members who collaborated to turn ideas into reality. So thank you so much for sharing your afternoon with me. The link to my slides is already in the chat. This is my email. This is my Twitter handle. I'd love, to connect with you afterwards. And if you have any feedback, please send it my way. And if you want to talk about the topic as well, just shoot me an email. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm ready for your questions.
Thank you, Mar. 1 second, so I allow people to unmute themselves. There we go. So everyone, any questions that you want to ask Mar? Okay, we have a thank you message. Thank you for the informative presentation and for the overview of existing examples of version control and version history usage in a design workflow. Okay,
my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for joining me.
Does anybody have any question? You can ask out loud or you can also type it in the chat and you're going to read it.
Hello. I want to ask a question, but my daughter is shouting here. So it was very interesting when you said to use auto update off feature for the collections in abstract. We never used it because basically for developers handoff, we create collection in a branch. And then it's approved by everybody, and it's basically stays like it is after the branch is merged, because it's there is no more work at this branch. And afterwards, if we wanted to have this collection updated, like we have another problem. This collection isn't updated anymore. We need to recreate it in the master. So maybe there is something, some workflow that I don't understand here.
Yeah. Okay. So as you mentioned, you can create collections in the branch, and you can also create collection outside of a branch in master. So what you could do in this case is create another collection with those artboards that is just on master, and that should pull the latest changes. And continue updating, basically, if it's done outside the branch.
Yeah, that's what we have to do in this case, and like there is no feature of like changing branch for the collection, something like that, and copying it to master.
No, not that I know of, but
like. Yeah, like you know, when there are a lot of screen flows, and it's with these titles, everything, it's really takes time to recreate it in another branch.
No, totally, I feel you. Okay. I mean, unfortunately, we're just not there in terms of feature parity, and I think that Although abstract has a lot of really good features, there are some that are missing. So I would encourage you maybe to tweet at them what your thoughts are. They can keep it in mind, and we can just hope that they develop something like that in the future, because it is a bit of a pain to create these collections, especially as we have more and more artboards or the flows get more and more complex. I totally agree with you.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. I'm sorry. I wish I had a better answer.
Okay, Mar, we have a couple more thank yous in the chat. How about questions? Would anybody want to ask something out loud or via chat? I will take the 5 seconds of complete silence as no further questions.
I think it's safe to say, I agree.
So thank you so much, Mar, for the talk tonight and for sharing your knowledge and experience with the community. It was a pleasure listening to you and having you here. She also shared her contact details if you want to tweet, if you want to find her on Twitter or reach out, please do so. And yeah, I wish everyone a lovely evening. I'm going to stop recording now.